Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. Grief is a universal experience, yet it's deeply isolating. When we lose someone we love, the world keeps moving around us while we struggle to make sense of our new reality. Finding a space where grief is acknowledged, honored, and shared can make all the difference in the healing process. I'm honored to have Sheila Martello with me today. Sheila is the founder of Stephy's Place, a nonprofit grief support center where people who are grieving can find comfort, connection, and community. She created the space out of her own loss, and in doing so, she's helping so many others navigate theirs. In our conversation, we'll talk about Sheila's personal journey, the unique support Stephy's Place offers, and the lessons she's learned about grief and healing along the way. We'll also explore the power of community, the myths that surround grief, and how we can all do a better job of supporting people in our lives who are mourning. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Sheila, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Can you start off by sharing a bit about your personal grief journey and what led you to create Stephy's Place?
Sure. I lost my husband in the attack of the World Trade Center in September of 2001. I was 37 years old. I had, at the time, a 5 and 7-year-old, two little boys. And I had just moved to my home about 10 days before my husband was killed. About 2 days later, a priest from the neighboring church knocked on my door and told me that they were starting a support group and encouraged me to go. Well, that was the last thing that I wanted to do, was to go and share my feelings with a bunch of strangers. So I said, sorry, Father, but it's not anything I'm interested in. And he left. About 2 weeks later, he knocked on my door again. And he said, could you just come and take a walk with me? And I lived close to the church. So we went for a walk, and he walked me over to where the support group was happening. And he said, please just go in and try it 3 times. If you don't like it after 3 times, I will never, ever ask you again. And I did. And that's where I was for the next 3 years, every Tuesday at 9:30 with other people that had lost loved ones on September 11th. About 14 years later, well, actually, I have to go back. It's important to go backwards before you can go forwards. And about 6 months after my husband died, I had a dream about him, and I consider it more of a visitation. And in that dream, he was sitting in his recliner, and he looked at me and he said, Sheila, listen, if God would have came to me in August and offered me a one-way ticket to heaven, I would have said no. But if God came to me now in January and offered me a one-way ticket home, I'd have to say no, because I am home and I'll wait for you. But until then, you take care of yourself and the boys and you live. So that stayed with me forever. I mean, it's still with me. And about 14 years later, I met a woman who was dying of cancer, and her name was Stephy. And I didn't spend a lot of time with her. I spent more time with her children. But the time I did spend with her, every time I left her, she said, Sheila, I know I'm going home. It's not about me. It's about the people I'm leaving behind. And the last time I saw her, which was about 4 days before she died, I kept thinking, like, what does that remind me of? Like, where did I hear that before? And I remembered the dream. And I said, I guess that's what I'm supposed to be doing. My boys were going off to college and I needed a purpose. And I said to myself, how did I get here where I'm functioning and I'm happy and I'm doing okay? And I remembered it was my support group. So that was the day I decided that I would open a center that would give a one support group to people like me. So I went back to my support group, my old support group, which we were just coincidentally, which we've learned over the years, there are no coincidences, that we were having a reunion luncheon. And I asked them if they wanted to help. And several of them said, yeah, we'll help. So that's what started it. That's what created the idea. And then it just grew from there.
It's interesting that you mentioned the priest coming by and saying just 3 times, just attend 3 times. Because I've heard that from other people who run support groups, peer support groups, that it is, yeah, the first couple times, it's really uncomfortable. Don't know. You just, but if you could stick it out, there's a lot of good that comes from that community.
Yes, definitely.
What was the process of starting Steffi's Place? What were the challenges in building that kind of support group?
So it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. It came with the idea. I went to people that I knew that knew what a support group was. One of the women that was in our support group and that was at the luncheon at the time owned a building. So she offered a room to us. And that's where it kind of started, with a room and a building and people with a passion. And from there, we decided that we would go and try to find other support groups that we could model ourselves, because we had our support group, but we had no idea what had happened, what a real support group, as we thought, a real support group. So we couldn't find any. Adult support, we couldn't find. There were support groups that happened in churches that lasted 8 weeks. Well, no, after 8 weeks, you might not even be taking a shower yet. That's not what we want. So we went to see AA meetings, Al-Anon meetings. We went to churches, and there was nothing that was like our group. So we knew right away that we were going to start something that truly wasn't out there yet for adults. And then we said, how do we get the word out? The facilitator that facilitated our group, which was the same priest that came to my door that day after my husband died, he was no longer a priest. He had left the church, and he was at our luncheon, and he said, let's put the word out. I'll do a talk. So we put a flyer. It seems so simple, but that's what we did. We put a flyer out and we said, Kevin Keelan talking about the roller coaster of grief. We've put it out anywhere we could, churches, any place, and we received 47 RSVPs. We had 278 people show up.
Wow.
That was the day before we were planning on opening Steffi's Place with one group. So the next day we opened, and again, we had one group, all different types of losses mixed, because that's what ours was. It was all September 11th, but there were people that had lost a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife. And so we had one group with mixed losses. About 12 people showed up, and it just snowballed after that. We started getting calls, and people were stopping in. And I soon realized that we needed more than one room, that we needed to separate the losses. And we used the people that showed up to ask them what they thought, because we learned over time that we're not the experts. The people that are experienced the loss at the time are the experts. So we just started asking them what they thought, and things started to happen.
I love that. I love how you say that it is the people who are experiencing grief who are the experts. And I totally agree that I think when people go into grief counseling, or, that there's this false belief that you should be led. And it is not, you're working with a therapist or you're working with a grief specialist. I think that walking alongside the person and letting them is the most important thing that a person who is supporting a griever can do.
Yes, we call it companioning.
Curious, what did you do before starting this group? I know that you were a parent, you're a mother. Did you do any other kind of work?
Before I was married, before I had children, I worked for McDonald's Corporation. I I started at McDonald's when I was 16, working at the register, and I loved it. It never seemed to be a job. I went to school, I came back, I became a store manager, and then my the person that owned the store, my store actually burnt down. So I found myself in a store with another store manager that wasn't working, and then I was asked by the corporation to come and work for them. So I did, and then I got married and I lost my first child. I lost my first baby, and then it started becoming a job, and I had several misses after that, and the I wasn't getting the support I needed. And I couldn't help that it kept happening, and it was impacting my work. So I decided to leave. I always said when McDonald's became a job, then I was going to leave. So I left, and I was fortunate that my husband had a job where I didn't have to work. I could stay home and be a stay-at-home mom, and that's what I did. And that's what I did all the way up to when I opened Stephy's Place. Of course, I was PTA president and things like that. But I didn't have a job that I went to.
Yeah, it's amazing in our country and many parts, most parts of the world, working with grief and how little we support it, how little we understand and really support it. You alluded to McDonald's, corporation, not understanding what you were going through or being supportive of what you're going through. And I know that in the United States, I believe it's 3 days that you get for grief leave or leave after a death happens in your family, which we know is unrealistic. So it's pretty amazing how little we talk about it, even though everyone
Yeah.
is going to experience it.
Yeah, I facilitate an infant loss group, and after you have a baby, a live child, you get 4 months off. Some people get 6 months off. If you lose a child, you get 3 days off.
Yeah.
Like that is so backwards. And I experienced it 30, my son would be 30, going to be 32. And that was 32 years ago. It's still happening.
Yeah.
Right? We hope there's been progress, um, you know, but it's scary.
Yeah. Very. What do you wish that more people understood about the grieving process since you've experienced and you continue to experience it on several levels?
Understanding the grieving process is very hard to do unless you've experienced it. Right? That's why Steffi's Place is so successful, because you sit with people that get it. So, and I struggle with this because in order for people to understand it, they have to experience it. So I wouldn't want anybody to have to truly understand it. Things that I would like people to understand about it would be that there are no rewards for speed, right? There's no reason to rush through it. People never get over it, right? That people need patience and understanding. And don't stop asking, even though the answers might have been for a year no. Things like that it is different. Everyone's grief is unique to them. It's like a fingerprint. So you can't the understanding is vast, because one person's grief is so much different than another. So you might understand what it's like to lose a child, but you don't understand what it's like to lose a spouse. Or your kids lost their dad and you lost your husband. The understanding is different. So we can't even understand each other. For us to expect society to understand, I think my wish is that society got more educated on it and became less mourning avoidant.
Yeah.
If that makes sense?
Yeah. Yes, that does make sense. I always asked, I was giving an interview and someone asked me, what's one thing that you could, you wish that people, or you could give advice you could give about mourning and grieving. And the only advice, and it just came up that I could think of, is listen, you're going to go through it. You can't ignore it. Really be present to it, dive into it, because you are going to have to experience that loss. And it's something that you'll experience your entire life. It is now part of your life, for good or for bad.
Learning to embrace it,
Yeah.
and learning to go towards it, not away from it. I use this, I tell people this sometimes. I say, everyone uses Waze. I use Waze, the directional
Yes.
navigation system. I use Waze if I'm going to the food store, because if there's a faster way to get there, I want to know what it is. So I said, if you put in your Waze, understanding your grief, and it told you to leave your driveway and go to the right, but you keep going to the left, guess what? You're never getting there.
Yeah.
Right? You have to go towards it. You have to go, you can go backwards before you can go forwards. You can evade and then encounter. However, if you get off the exit, you got to get back on.
Yeah.
And you need to go towards it, because that's where the healing is. Some of the things that bring us the most pain in the beginning wind up being our most comfortable things, and the things that bring us the most healing if we just allow it to. But a lot of people are told, don't go past that house. Don't listen to that song. Don't look at those videos. And it needs to be said that it's temporary. Like, temporarily, don't look at that video, or don't
Yep.
go past that house. Not forever.
Yep. I agree. Now, I know that your support groups are peer led. They're peer
Yes.
led of grief support. Can you, and the answer might be no, I really can't, but can you explain how the peer led grief support groups differ from traditional grief counseling?
Yes. Well, grief counselors, and a grief counselor is trained in grief, and it's usually one-on-one, right? Now, most therapists have never had grief training in their studies, which concerns me. Is the reason why I went to Colorado to train for grief and not back to school. So if you're asking about grief counseling, though, because they know grief, I think it's a great support to a peer-led group. But the difference is, in a peer-led group, number one, you're being led by people that have experienced the loss. In our groups, no one can facilitate a group that hasn't experienced that loss in the group. And it is a give and take. For instance, if there's 10 people in a group and the group is an hour, you're getting an average between the beginning, the opening, and the ending. You're getting an average of maybe 5 minutes to talk. Where in grief counseling, you're getting an hour to talk. So you're getting the benefit of being able to express things that are weighing heavy on you, but also the benefit of hearing other people. And then taking that information and then processing that one-on-one with a grief counselor if you choose. But it's totally different when you have to do all the talking, or you're expecting someone to be the authority on grief, which sometimes happens in grief counseling, when we, as facilitators, in a grief support group, in a peer-led support group, we sit back and of course we share our experiences, but we allow the group to take on whatever energy they need to take on. So it's all about them.
Yeah, I think that there's such a comfort to being with a group of people, community that has been through the same thing and not having to talk. There are days that you're not going to want to talk, that you're just going to want to sit back and just be with people. And the beauty of having a peer support group is that you have that understanding and you have that support, even, and you don't need to say something and people understand.
Yeah, and you're sitting with people that get it.
Yeah.
They all get it. And when you are struggling or you think you're going crazy, people say, nope, I did the same thing. And, or what did you do on the first anniversary? What did you do? You're getting people that are actually experienced in what you're going through at the same time.
And it's so amazing to me because in our culture, like every single person I work with, every single person I work with, without exception, always asks me, am I crazy? Am I doing this right? Is people don't understand there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And because we've been conditioned that grief should happen, it should, I have people that I work with who are surprised that after a month, that they're still feeling this loss, or after 6 months or after a year, their family members are like, it's been a year. Are you, starting to move on? And this is something that your life is changed. This is a before and after moment when a person passes away that you love. And so this is that is part of your life for the rest of your life, and it's okay. You need to grieve and it will come and go. But it just surprises me that people don't understand that it's okay, that there's no right or wrong way. And you must get that a lot from seeing all the people come through Stephy's place.
Yeah, I mean, we serve 500 people a week, and in the groups, there are the same sort of themes, right? Where I haven't cleaned out the closet yet. Should I have? Or I go to the cemetery every day. Am I crazy? Does anybody else do that? Or I don't go to the cemetery. Or I still have my wife on the mantle and my kids keep asking me what we're doing with mommy, right? Like there's no, we explain to everyone, it's not time, it's what you do with the time, right? So it could be, and the seasons, people will complain, it's cold in New Jersey right now. So people aren't going out as much. And we were yesterday in group, somebody brought up, they said, is it just because it's the winter and as soon as the spring comes, it'll be better because we can go outside? And as much as sunshine helps, the other thing to understand that it's 4 seasons, right? Like people say a year. It's not a year, 12 months. In my estimation, it's 4 seasons, right? Your winter could be in the summer, right? Your spring can be in the winter. It's letting your mind and body go through the seasons. And then you get to the second year when it's, oh no, it's reality, right? And then it starts to take on a new shape. It's just allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to take as much time as you need. Because to your point, grief is different than mourning. Yeah. Mourning you do for the rest of your life. And mourning is a shared experience. Grief is a very personal, individual experience. So people don't understand that either. They think grief and mourning are the same, right? And of course, nobody wants to learn this. It's not like, before you lose somebody, you're like, excuse me, but I'd like to go to a grief class. This was never on my bucket list to open a grief center or to learn about grief.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, let's define grief and mourning. And how I learned it, and you could weigh in on this, is that grief is that internal, as you said, it's very personal. It's the internal emotions, it's what you're going through internally, where mourning is the outward expression of that grief. And we see it in ritual where we have celebrations of life or funerals, as, you know, and other things that we do. Is that your understanding of it also?
Yes, I always say, yeah, exactly what you said. Grief is the kind of the container that holds all the emotions. And then mourning is grief gone public.
Yep.
You can't do it by yourself. It's a shared experience, like you said, with the rituals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you spoke a little bit about the specific themes that are the same or very similar that run through different groups of people who are mourning. And you brought up, you know, hey, is it time for me to clean up, you know, clean out the closet yet? Or, you know, I have mommy on the mantle. What are we going to do with mommy? Are there other themes that are similar no matter what type of grief people are going through? And then opposite of that, what are some of the differences that you see from, you know, let's say a parent loss, a child loss, a spouse loss? Are there any big themes, or even loss by suicide? Are there big differences between those also that you see?
Well, I think the similarities that we see definitely are guilt. It doesn't seem to matter how the person died, and it's not for everyone, but the majority of people always have some sort of I should have. You know, we say don't shit on yourself or don't shit on anybody else, right? And I always think that some of my experiences I had because the plan was that I was going to do this someday. When my husband died that morning, he was leaving for work and he kissed me goodbye. I was still in bed and he was wearing this ugly green shirt. Now, for years, I beat myself up for not telling him to change the ugly green shirt. And in my mind, if he had changed that ugly green shirt, he would have missed the ferry and he wouldn't have been there when the buildings came down. Right? Now, that's an example, but that's kind of a similarity that we see in groups. People take things, and it could be to my friends and family that was very irrational, right? Like, what are you talking about? To me, that was very rational. So number one, we can't rationalize an irrational thought, right? And the other thing is that has to be processed by the person, not by you saying, you know, Sheila, stop thinking that way. It's never going to bring them back. There's a lot of those thoughts that people get. That another reason why it's great to have peer-led support groups, because those come out. People are comfortable and safe enough to talk about. But that's definitely a theme that I find throughout the groups, that because we want control, we want to change what happened. So we think if there's something that we could have done or we did that we could have done differently, somehow the end result would have changed. Yeah. And there's many, but that's the one that sticks out the most. Differences, I really think that the difference comes in your grief. Grief is different for every single person, right? It is. So to say that in a loss of child group, the difference between that and a loss of parent group or a loss of spouse group, I don't think I can come up with a difference, because grief itself is so different. So there's definitely more similarities than there are differences. I mean, they're all different. I guess that's what I mean. I can't pick a difference because it's all different. Yeah. In the loss of spouse group, it's all different. If that makes, I keep saying if that makes sense, because yeah,
we're all individuals, and our relationships with the person we lost, or the being, if you're grieving a pet, is different. Those relationships are different for each person. So it does make perfect sense. I think that having those different groups, so that sense of community that we spoke about, is really, really healing, and really powerful, going through that process. And have you read any studies about this, the sense of community in grieving and loss, and how community helps a lot?
No, I'm not a big reader of research.
I I don't
I
blame you.
like I like life experience better. Uh, I think that we learned that community healing in community is very beneficial just because of how Steffi's Place has grown and how many people have told us that it's not only the community that they create themselves here, it's taken outside where they now have a new group of friends. They now have people that they can text or call. They now, their families sometimes become friends. They, your community changes. You change when you lose someone. And sometimes you don't fit into your old community anymore. And it's not, it sometimes is the other people, but a lot of times it's you. You just don't have that same feeling or perception or of what you want to do. The same things aren't as important as they used to be. And then you find other people that get you. So that community starts at Steffi's Place, but then kind of seeps out to the outside world, which is really, really nice for people.
That's interesting that you mentioned that change in your community, and how a lot of times it's stemming from yourself, the person who's grieving. And so not only as a person, and I know for my own loss, when my own loss, and having to change the people that I hung around with. And I never thought about it this way, but you mourn the person that you're losing, but you're mourning you might mourn, if you're moving on from your community, you're changing the community, you might mourn that loss of that community and the life that you had and what it should have been. So you're mourning a lot more than just the loss of your loved one.
Yeah, and you're changed. And people will say things like, "Where's the old Sheila? We want the old Sheila back." And that person is gone. And another thing that is really beneficial for people to understand is that yes, you're changed and you're different, but in the dictionary, the definition of different isn't worse. It's just that, changed. And I think everyone is on a similar path in the beginning, right? When you're going through the grief, you're on a similar path that's your own. Then you kind of get to the fork in the road, and then you can choose. You're going to mourn. Are you going to mourn to be bitter, or are you going to mourn to be better? And that's your choice, right? In the beginning, you really don't have a choice. It's, do I take a shower or do I not? Do I stay in bed? Do I pull the covers over my head or do I get out? Right? But then you do get to that fork, and everyone gets to that fork and can make the choice. That's the big decision, right? How do you want to change? Do you want to be bitter or better?
Yeah, I would agree. What advice would you give to someone supporting a grieving friend or a family member? Because most people do not know what to say or to do. And we have no idea. We see what's on TV, which is usually really dramatic, right? So what would you say to people who want to be more supportive of a loved one?
I would say to be patient, to not try to fix them, to follow their lead, to ask, right? Not just do, to ask. to listen to what they're saying. And if you don't understand, ask for clarification. And I think the most important is to say their name, not the person that's grieving, the person they lost. Say their name, talk about them. People avoid it. I have a story. It's not long, but there was a woman who lost her son, and she was in the grocery store, and one of her really good friends had avoided her since the funeral, and they were in the grocery store together, and she could see her when she turned the aisle. She could see her, and she was going to a different aisle. So the woman who had lost her son went up to the woman and rammed her cart into her and said, "Stop it. I need you to talk about him and say his name." Right? So sometimes we have to be our own best advocates because people don't know. They don't understand because they haven't been through it. However, if somebody wants to learn how to do it, that's one of the biggest things is talk about them, say their name. It's we as people that lose someone have two responsibilities. One is to never let them be forgotten, and the other one is to figure out how to live a full life again. Well, we can't, it's hard to remember them always if people aren't talking about them. It helps us if people talk about them.
Yep. So interesting. Kind of leads me to my next question. In our society, we're always pressured to move on from grief. How can we shift the way we collectively approach loss and healing in our communities, in our society? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Again, I think it goes back to listening, educating yourself, talking to people that are mourning or have lost. We live in a very mourning avoidant culture. That's not going to change unless we change it. There are ways that we can do that in schools, in I know funeral homes that do it. They have days where everyone that was lost in that year, they have a day of remembrance. Like, why can't that happen in schools where it doesn't have to be religious, it doesn't have to be anything, but you have one day? Why can't it happen in businesses where anybody that's lost someone over the year, you have one day where everybody gets a battery operated candle on their desk and we have a moment of silence or whatever, right? We have to help society because society can't help itself.
I love that idea, especially in business, because we really need to be doing this better. But I also think it is about how we label grief. People who are grieving, yes, we might be sad, we might be anxious at times, like everyone else in the world, right? But I really dislike when people who are grieving, they're labeled as being depressed. And I think that it is a very natural thing to grieve. We, as humans, we are all animals go through it. I mean, you see, I know that I have cats. I had two cats. One passed away. And I remember coming home with the empty carrier and the cat running up, doing the meows, like, "Oh, where have you been?" And looking in and seeing an empty carrier and giving me, like, the cat looked at me, gave me a look, like understood. My cat understood his brother wasn't coming home. And we don't label animals as being depressed. I mean, this is a natural part of life. And so it kind of bothers me that we label it, or some people label it as depression or anything
Right.
else that we label it.
Grief in itself is not clinical.
Yeah.
It's sadness. And unfortunately, doctors and some professionals never get trained in actually what grief is. So it presents as clinical,
Yeah.
right? But it's not. And now, granted, if there's a pre-existing condition of anxiety or depression, yes, it can be clinical, and I would never refute that. But all in all, it's not clinical. It's sadness. And people are really, really sad when something happens, right? Because we love deeply. That's a good thing, right? That we were able to love. The sadness comes from that. If we don't allow people to be sad, if we want to right away medicate it or tell them that they're depressed or they have some sort of disorder, that doesn't help anyone. It's going through the process. I look at the process that now I lost my first child, I lost my husband, I lost my parents within 2 years of losing my husband, within 4 months of each other. My brother-in-law died of a pulmonary embolism 3 years later after that, right? I've experienced loss. Where I am now, I never would have been if somebody had stifled my sadness or labeled me as you are just depressed, right? It's getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And again, we go back to society as a whole. When were we ever taught to be comfortable with our uncomfortable? It's, oh, you have a pain in your back, take a pill. You have this, take this. How about just follow the flow of life? And, if we can teach that young, right? It's hard to teach it now because people don't like this feeling, right? They don't want to feel sad. So again, people label themselves, I'm depressed. Like, I'm not a clinician. However, I like to lend towards, no, you're sad first before we get to you're clinically depressed.
Yep. Yeah. No, you're grieving. You're not depressed. You're grieving. You're sad. And I agree with you 100%. And that's why I love the sense of community that Stephy's Place has, because I think a big part of it is having that community where you can learn from each other, where you can support each other. I know, 200 years ago when we all lived on the farms, we had our communities. We had our families, our extended families, to not only take care of the person if the person was sick, to take care of that person, or if they died suddenly, but you'd come together as a community and you'd mourn together, and you'd come together with your extended family for an extended amount of time, not just a day. And I think that because we don't have those extended communities anymore, it has affected us. So having, some place like Stephy's Place, I would consider it a necessity for.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is there's only one Steffi's Place in that we know of, only one adult grief center. There's grief centers for children, family grief centers, but one that concentrates on adult loss, and specific to the loss. Each group is specific to the loss that you're experiencing. We don't mix. That's I don't know of another place in the country that has it.
Yeah, I know that there are places that there are individual peer support groups and that meet, but are more generalized. I know through a lot of hospices, there are hospices that have specific grief support groups for certain types of loss. I know that there are support groups for suicide loss, peer support groups, but Stephy's Place is very special in that it is a place that helps adults, but has all of those different programs, looks at all of those different types of loss, and has groups that meet based on that. So it is, you're right, very special. And I'm curious about the future of Steffi's Place. Are there going to be any changes? Are there any new initiatives or programs?
Well, we our work is what we do
Yeah.
every day
Yeah.
is support groups. And over the years, we've established a resource center where we can refer people to one-on-one therapy, or other modalities of healing, Reiki, EMDR, things like that. Um, we are putting out the feelers for a travel group. People have said that they don't want to travel by themselves, especially loss of spouse. So we're feeling it out with all of our loss of spouse groups, and doing a meetup where they can come and meet and see who wants to travel together. So we're doing things like that. Um, Myself, I am considering starting. I don't know whether I want to do like a Facebook Live or something like that, where so many times people call and say, "Where's Steffi's Place in Dallas?" or "Where's Steffi's Place in California?" And because the other special part of it is it's extended, right? Loss of a spouse and loss of a child, we get you through your second anniversary, right? You're here for a while, and people don't have that support. And I can't. Um, I physically can't go and open Steffi's Place all around the country. So I've been trying to figure out how to do that. So I'm considering doing maybe a Facebook Live and doing like, you know, a mourning conversation, MOURNING, and trying to support people that way, because people have been approaching me to kind of be able to give what Steffi's Place does. I can't run support groups all over, but just to give the information
Yeah.
and the education out. So I guess that's kind of where we're going, other than our daily exercise of just helping people in their grief.
It is a lot, and you do so much. One last question, because wow, the time has gone very quickly. So I appreciate you being here. And I know we've spoken about this, but if you could have listeners, if you could leave listeners with one message about grief and healing, what would it be?
Don't be afraid of it. Find help. It's not supposed to be done alone. And you will survive. Potentially, in the end, be better. I can leave you with one thing. If not for September 11th, Steffi's Place would not exist.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much for joining us today, and
Thank you.
thank you for the incredible work. You are such a joy to talk with, and thank you for providing us with the gift of your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Before we go, can you share how our listeners can learn more about Steffi's Place and get in touch?
Sure. We have a website, steffysplace.org. Our email address is steffysplace15@gmail.com. And Steffi's is STEPHYS. We're on Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. We have daily posts on Facebook and Instagram that are wonderful. And our phone number is 732-797-9739. Any of those ways to reach out.
And I know that you're also a nonprofit. Do you have
Yes,
a
we are a
donation? Do you
nonprofit.
have a donation page?
Yes, we do, on our website.
Okay, great. I'll link out to that also. So if people want to
Great.
donate, they
Thank you.
can. You're welcome. Listeners, grief is one of life's hardest journeys, but as we've talked about today, you don't have to walk it alone. Healing isn't about moving on or forgetting. It's about learning to carry your loved one forward while still living fully. Whether it's finding a support group, reaching out to a trusted friend, or simply giving yourself permission to grieve, know that support is out there. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comfort and Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.